Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and please subscribe and like my channel for the latest news. Today I want to take you through a dramatic and troubling development. Russia in panic. Hundreds of trains stuck as Europe cuts Kaliningrad route. This story has major geopolitical implications, and I'll explain how it unfolded, why it matters, and what might happen next. To begin, let's set the stage. Kaliningrad is a Russian exclave on the Baltic Sea, separated from the rest of Russia by Lithuania and Belarus. It is strategically vital. It hosts Russia's Baltic Fleet, serves as a military outpost, and maintains economic and symbolic value for Moscow. But its location also makes it vulnerable to transit and supply disruptions. The connection between mainland Russia and Kaliningrad has typically relied heavily on rail routes crossing through European Union territory, especially Lithuania. Now, because of the wider conflict involving Russia and Ukraine, the European Union has imposed sanctions on Russia. Some of those sanctions have directly impacted goods that could be carried through EU member states. Lithuania, as an EU member, began enforcing these restrictions. On June 18th, it banned the transit via rail of goods that were subject to EU sanctions, items such as coal, certain metals, advanced technologies, and construction materials. As a result, many trains loaded with sanctioned goods could no longer continue their journey through Lithuania toward Kaliningrad. Once that decision was taken, the impact was immediate. Hundreds of trains became stuck at border points or were halted mid-transit, as the rail lines they depended on passed through Lithuanian territory. The stoppage created a logistical nightmare for Russian supply chains aiming to serve Kaliningrad. Some estimates suggested dozens or even hundreds of freight trains were affected. Local reports also noted panic among residents in Kaliningrad as people rushed to stock up on essentials, fearing shortages. Russia's authorities and state media responded by condemning Lithuania's move, calling it a breach of international agreements and threatening retaliation. From Moscow's perspective, the decision by Lithuania, acting under EU rules, was seen not just as a commercial or regulatory measure, but as a direct challenge. The Kremlin argued that rail transit to Kaliningrad should be guaranteed under earlier treaties and agreements. Russian officials labeled the restrictions as a blockade, an attempt to strangle the supply line to the enclave. The tone escalated quickly, with threats that Russia might respond with serious consequences if the situation were not reversed. Yet so far, Moscow has not turned those warnings into overt military action, perhaps wary of the broader risks of confrontation with NATO and the EU. From the Lithuanian side, the official position was that they were simply implementing EU rules. They argued that Lithuania was not acting unilaterally, but following decisions agreed upon by the European Commission, and that only goods subject to sanctions were barred. Transit of non-sanctioned goods and passengers was claimed to continue. They insisted they had not imposed a full blockade, and that the transit of items not covered by sanctions would still be allowed. This standoff underscores how sanctions and trade measures are now being used as tools of strategic pressure. Russia's reliance on transit through neighboring states gives some leverage to the EU and to Lithuania, which can enforce rules and conditions that Russia is forced to reckon with. The situation reveals how even critical supply lines are exposed in a conflict environment. For Kaliningrad, disruption of rail transit threatens everything from fuel, construction materials, machinery, to even consumer goods that maintain the daily life of residents there. Let's pause and consider the stakes. If Russia cannot reliably supply Kaliningrad by rail, it may have to resort to alternative routes, sea or air, which are costlier and more complex, especially under sanctions, naval patrols, or blockades. The disruption could weaken Russia's military posture in the Baltic region, complicate civilian logistics, and erode the sense of stability there. It also poses a political risk. For Russia, failure to secure transit is a blow to its regional influence and prestige. For the EU, especially Lithuania, it is a test of resolve, whether member states will fully enforce sanctions even if it risks escalating tensions with Moscow. What could happen next? There are several possible scenarios. First, diplomatic backchannels might lead to compromise. Russia might push for exemptions, negotiate over which goods are allowed, or bring pressure via other EU states to soften Lithuania's enforcement. Moscow could argue for special rights or transit guarantees based on previous agreements. Second, Russia could intensify economic or political pressure on Lithuania or the EU. It might consider cutting energy supplies, leveraging its influence in other spheres, or applying retaliatory measures in non-military realms. But since Lithuania is an EU and NATO member, any aggressive escalation would carry great risk. Third, Russia might adapt by shifting supply routes. It could increase shipments through Belarus or via Baltic Sea routes, though those paths may also face scrutiny or restrictions. However, those alternatives tend to be more expensive, slower, and politically complicated. Fourth, in a worst-case scenario, the tension could escalate further if Moscow resorts to military posturing or hybrid tactics. Though that would risk broader confrontation with NATO, something Russia appears keen to avoid for now. Meanwhile, Kaliningrad residents may face shortages, higher prices, and growing uncertainty. The region's economy could suffer. For the Russian government, managing public perception will be crucial, especially if supply disruptions become visible in stores or infrastructure projects stall. It's also important to note that this event is more than a local dispute. It highlights how geography, infrastructure, and politics intersect in modern conflicts. A single rail route becomes a pressure point. An isolated enclave becomes a strategic flashpoint, and logistics become part of the larger battlefield of influence. For decades, Kaliningrad has been a symbol of Russian power in the Baltic region. It is both a military outpost and a window into Europe, but its dependence on external routes has always been a vulnerability. The current crisis has exposed just how fragile that connection is. European countries view the enforcement of sanctions as a matter of principle, proof that Russia cannot bypass the economic consequences of its actions in Ukraine. But for Russia, this is seen as a deliberate attempt to isolate and humiliate it, forcing Moscow to react or risk appearing weak. This clash of interpretations makes compromise difficult, as both sides frame the issue in moral or strategic terms rather than purely logistical ones. In practical terms, Russia may now accelerate efforts to make Kaliningrad more self-sufficient. That could include expanding sea transport capacity, investing in storage facilities, or incentivizing local production. But these measures will take time and money, and they won't completely replace the efficiency of land routes. Some analysts believe this crisis will serve as a test of the EU's unity. If Moscow increases pressure, will all member states continue to back Lithuania's hard line? Or could we see divisions appear between those advocating strict enforcement and those preferring a more pragmatic approach? For now, the situation remains tense but contained. Trains remain stuck, goods are being rerouted, and officials on all sides are trading statements. Each side is watching the other carefully, measuring how far to push without triggering open confrontation. In the end, the panic reflects both a logistical crisis and a psychological one. Russia, accustomed to projecting power, finds itself constrained by geography and political boundaries it does not control. Lithuania, a small state by comparison, has become a key player in a much larger geopolitical game, backed by the strength of European and transatlantic alliances. This episode shows how interconnected today's world truly is, how a single railway line can become a flashpoint in global politics, and how economic decisions can ripple outward to affect diplomacy, security, and everyday life. The trains stuck on the route to Kaliningrad are not just metal containers on tracks. They are symbols of a world divided by sanctions, mistrust, and the struggle for influence. Thanks for staying with me through this deep dive. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more updates, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next news.